Welcome to another episode of the CarryTrainer Higher Line podcast. This is Mickey Shook with the Higher Line podcast and my man Drew behind the editing desk. Today's topic, will our nation endure? Will this republic still stand? I don't know. Maybe the things that we're seeing are the end of all of it. Maybe not. I want to chat on that for a bit. I also want to talk about where I'm at. I'm in the great outdoors. I am enjoying some fresh air and some sunshine. Something I think that we take for granted. Something that our ancestors just 100, 200, 300, 400 years ago had as their existence. We are deeply and inextricably connected to the natural world. No matter how many layers of walls and structure and cities we put between us, we are part of this natural world. The great writers of the 19th and 20th century that traveled back out during the Industrial Revolution, that traveled back out into the wildlands, knew that. We are inextricably connected to this. And I think it's good for a man's soul or a woman's soul to get out in it as much as possible. Let's get right to the topic. Turn on any news feed and what do you see? You see wars. You see suffering. You see cities being torn apart. Something that we're seeing a ton of, people acting with lawlessness. Lawlessness through our American cities. Shoplifting, violence, insurrection, violence from riots to just random acts where people are being attacked, jumping on cars. Lawlessness, straight up lawlessness. I love history. I love history from the perspective of how did we get here? I love history from the perspective of looking back. Can we see things and how they were changed or molded by the writers of history? Can we see how things are changed or molded because maybe the people drafting or writing history were afraid of pushback? I was talking with a friend of mine today, an attorney, Andrew Branca. Andrew and I were talking about some famous court cases that have come up in the last couple of years, court cases that have led to riots. After the fact, when all of the facts have come out, there are things that are completely different than what the general public thinks or was told by the media. And this isn't the nature of this discussion, but I think there's some value here. Yet nobody goes back and they say, hey man, you guys tore apart cities. You guys fired people. You guys villainized actors. When I say actors, I don't mean actors like Shakespeare. I mean the people involved in whatever the situation was that was high profile. People's lives were destroyed because of misinformation. I don't want you to go off the deep end here and say, well, who put the misinformation out there? It was the media, it was some shadowy figures. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying people chose not to rectify bad information because it would be bad for business. Why? Not because the government, it would be bad for business because people, the general population, would villainize and then jump on that person that said, excuse me, have you guys maybe dug in a little bit and seen that there were some other facts that came out that maybe don't line up with the prior narrative? No, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. You just have to continue with the false narrative and everything's going to be fine. Just put your head down and everything's going to be fine. Well, so too is our history. We have some people that have rewritten our history and they look at our founders and they say, oh, these men were a certain way. Highly religious people, highly virtuous people. And you have other people that say they were horrific men that subjugated a race of people, that created a nation on the backs of others. The facts are, both of those things are true. Both of those things are untrue. Depends on who you're talking about and when we're talking about them. Massachusetts, the state of Massachusetts. Check this out. Here's an interesting fact. the Constitution for the state of Massachusetts, I hope this dog decides to shut up at some point. The Constitution for the state of Massachusetts is the oldest contiguously operating constitution on the planet Earth. Do you know what the number 2 oldest constitution operating on Earth is? Contiguously, the United States Constitution. Think about that. The state of Massachusetts and the United States government. We're talking about a few hundred years here, people. Our founders crafted and took so much of our idea of the Republican government, not Republican like Republican, Democrat, Independent, but the Republic from the Romans. And that's what I want to talk about today, where that came from. There's several common themes that come up over and over and over again. So my background is, I'm nobody from nowhere. I'm a self-taught carpenter, firearms instructor. I'm a business guy. I own Gunfighter Gun Oil. I was involved in politics for many years. That's how Drew and I met, our editor. I'm a dad. I'm a grandpa. And I come to this with a reverence for our history, understanding that men, when I say men in these stories, I mean mankind, we're fallible, man. None of us are perfect. So let's throw that notion out the window. When we come to a discussion and we go, well, that guy fucked up once. Yeah. So did you, so did I. Let's just throw that out the window as if all of these people in history are supposed to be perfect. In my travels as a firearms instructor and just around the world, country mostly, I've not done much world travels, but much travels in our nation, I've spent as much time as I can visiting historical places relating to the founding of our nation. And across the board, these themes come up. And one of them, above all else, is woven through the fabric that makes and made our society. And it was based on this principle of a virtuous person. Oftentimes when we hear the word virtuous, we think about the religious context of virtue, purity, sinless, blameless. That's not what I'm talking about, nor is that completely the context of what the founders were talking about. They were talking about this Roman concept of civic virtue. And in that, they knew that a republic, as any other time in history one came about, would fail without civic virtue. I've got some notes on my lap. I'm thinking about, as I'm going through these notes, I'm thinking about all of the amazing men and women that founded our republic and how there was this commonality in their lives, which was sacrifice, the sacrifice for the greater good. Now, people hear this and they go, I have sacrificed, I work really hard, or I was in the service, or I'm a fireman, or whatever. No, that's not what I'm talking about. There was this commonality of sacrifice for the republic. We now have this notion, we now today have this idea that we have this birthright. To be here, I just get to be here and just whatever. I can just go about my business and America owes me something. Our founders looked at the life cycle of republics in history, and just like the life of a human, the same thing happened in a republic. There was the infancy stage where everything was new and vibrant and alive, but at the same time that it was new and vibrant and alive, it was immature, right? We had a Declaration of Independence before we had a Constitution codified, a roadmap to follow, right? We proclaimed our independence before we had a map on what that independence looked like. We had a Constitution before we had codified a Bill of Rights. On that, many of the states' constitutions started with a Bill of Rights. Look up the history of that. John Adams said, without virtue, America cannot succeed. Without virtue, America cannot succeed. So the origin of this civic virtue comes from Roman life and government. has to do with rights, liberties, and obligations. Those obligations, so oftentimes we immediately think, let me go back a second, we think that we have these rights and these liberties. That's like my job here. So I live in the US, I have rights, I have liberties. There's a whole other side. It's a two-faceted coin. One side, rights, liberties, flip her over, obligations. Again, don't for a second think, and I'm not taking anything away from public service. You may have been the president of the United States, you may have been a mayor, you may have served 30 years in the armed forces or in some capacity as a civil servant. That is not what this is talking about. That's not what these obligations are talking about. I suppose in the sense a mayorship or a presidency does fit this narrative. What they were talking about as obligations was things like jury, militia, and most importantly, the political process, And part of that political process, so oftentimes we just think voting. George Washington was probably the perfect example of a man who gave his service and then retracted himself back to his private life. So put that as the pedestal in your head of the epitome, to epitomize, right, of what this looks like, the epitome of it. Back at that time, they had some requirements, property requirements. So you had to own property to be part of this political process. Well, that's just horrible. That's just horrible. That's creating sex. Well, first of all, not S-E-X, S-E-C-T. That's stratifying the people. There was a reason for that. Am I saying I agree with it? Not necessarily, but let's think about where they were at. To own property denoted wealth. To have wealth most likely denoted a level of education. Education, this grasp of knowledge, made those people better suited to leading, to governing, and to making choices. Virtue, put the good of the Commonwealth above my own self. And I do that through actions. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Go back to some of these founding states. They looked at themselves differently than we do now. They looked at themselves differently as in a collective, right? All for one, one for all. This concept of we go together, right? You look at the founders as they signed that declaration. They made statements. Surely we'll all be hung together, right? If we get caught, if we fail in this endeavor. And I think our individualism is what sets us apart as Americans. We have so drawn out that individualism in so many ways that we have lost the collectivism, the Commonwealth. We have lost that we are still part of a collective. States' rights. I'm looking at some of my notes here because as I was reading and writing on this before sharing this with you, there's so much of this stuff that all starts at the kitchen table in our house. It starts with the people that we hire as school teachers. It happens with, edit coming up here, Drew, I'm going to sneeze, and maybe not. It happens with the people that we put in pulpits, the people that we hire to teach our kids martial arts. It happens with Cub Scout leaders, all the folks that we put into positions of being examples over young people. Virtue comes in living a life of moderation, being frugal. It's not just about restraining ourselves from things. We can live free and enjoy, but it's about having the ability to restrain ourselves, because in that, we will expect the same from government. Here's a concept I talk about often, and I get tons of pushback from people. There are great thinkers. I spoke yesterday or the day before on some of the great French Enlightenment thinkers, and many of them thought that a monarchy was the best form of government. Why they thought that monarchy was the best form of government was not because they wanted to be ruled. It's because they spent a lifetime, these philosophers, studying the mind of man. They spent a lifetime studying how mankind is lazy and how we get complacent and how we simply slip into patterns. It is work to maintain a virtuous life. Again, do not hear this word and wrap it around religious context. Those two things can go together. They also may not. So don't immediately wrap the two together. But these thinkers of that Enlightenment period, which led to the French Revolution, side note, people poo-poo the French. Study this. The French have won more battles across the history of mankind than any other army. The French, I'll say it again, have won more battles than any other military across the course of time. Go read on that. They knew a thing or two about art. They knew a thing or two about the refinement of culture. They knew a thing or two about literature. They knew a thing or two about overthrowing of governments. At the same time, the same tumult that was happening on our shores, was happening on theirs. This flourish and blossom of liberty, this blossom that flourished into liberty, was not just here in our little colonies. Back to the point. These philosophers like Voltaire, that said and thought that a monarchy was the only way that men could ever reliably be led, knew it and said it to be so because they knew that men consume each other and they consume themselves. So what did we do different? Instead of a monarchy, instead of a king or a queen or an emperor, we created the law. The Constitution is our guide. The difference between a king and a constitution is we subject ourselves to that law, to that document, that Constitution. As it sits here, I say, okay, I'm going to follow this document. I'm going to submit myself to these laws. Well, now our streets are lawless. Not everywhere. Now, if a cop does his job, he or she is villainized. Are there bad cops? Have there been bad cops? You're damn right there have. I've known some. I've known policemen that were criminals. I've known policemen that should be locked up in prison. On the flip side, I've known policemen and women that have been selfless and serviceless throughout the course of decades of their career. So I think it's a stupid argument when we say all cops are corrupt, or a stupid argument when we say the law is corrupt. People are corrupt, and choices are what lead us to corruption. I again reiterate, this is not a religious discussion, not because I don't want to talk about religion, but it's very easy for a person to immediately go down that path, and that is not what we are talking about, because we are talking about the law and our republic. You can plug in your religious belief system if it is one that is virtuous, if it is one that respects the rights and liberties of others, if it is one that causes you to be thoughtful in how you go about connecting with the world, if it is one that goes about having you teach your children good, if it is one that has you love your neighbor, right, as you would love yourself. There are numerous religions and organizations around the world that don't do that. Not the nature of this discussion. This concept of a virtuous society and where we have gotten now is something the founders knew oh too well. Travel to Philadelphia, New York, Princeton, New Jersey, all of these places where Boston, all of these places where the birthplace of our nation really took off, where these little grass fires became the firestorm that set ablaze to our nation, to our continent, to the world. And you will see over and over again in the writings etched on stone in monuments in DC and other places, you will see knowledge and virtue come up over and over and over. Knowledge of what? What did our founders study? What did they study? If we want to pull the brakes on this runaway train of the breakdown, of the fracture, of the de-evolution, of the complete and total destruction of our republic, we've got to go back to the beginning and look at what they did that lit this fire, that blew that oxygen onto it. Knowledge. Franklin, Jefferson, Adams, all of them spoke on it over and over and over and over. The silliness of people that think that there was some Illuminati-esque concepts that these guys were trying to hide from the masses. What they were really saying is right in front of you is this natural world full of all the beauties of creation, full of all of the beauties and ideals that matter to the protection and proliferation of this young republic. Go study them. Go learn from them. Emulate them. Here, a swarm of bees. Don't just emulate them, but teach them to your children. Observe the natural world as I'm doing out here today. Look at the laws of nature and emulate them. Virtue, knowledge, service, sacrifice. That's what these people did. Now, as I started out, you may listen to this and say, well, some of them were horrible people. They did horrible things. Sure. So'd probably you. So'd one of your uncles. It's not an absolution of bad behavior or an absolution of sin. If we start a discussion like this and we just try to find fault in the things or the choices or the lives of those involved, we'll find plenty. That's not the goal. So let's start out, we're 20 minutes in, let's start out with where we should have. What is the goal? The goal is let's protect and promote this great cause of liberty, our republic. Voltaire and others, the reason, that they did not like democracy and republics, which is what we are. We're not a democracy. We use the democratic voting process. This always pisses one or two commenters off. Aristotle, Plato, Voltaire, Jefferson, Adams, all of these people, these thinkers, these minds, all had the same conclusion, that democracy is mob rule. Mickey Shook didn't say that. Please, for the love of God and the universe and all things holy, go read about it if you want to comment to me that you don't like it. Go piss on the grave of Jefferson and Plato and Aristotle and Socrates and all of those people, because they're the ones that said it, not I. Little old me is just reading what they wrote. So these dudes knew this because man is a lazy, vile creature. At the same time, we can be both loving and kind. We can be compassionate. We can be moral driven. We can be virtuous, right? But those are all choices. And it is very easy when left to our own devices to pitter away into those darker places, those paths of least resistance, right? The title of this podcast, The Higher Line. Probably the number one driving force in my life as a scope of how I direct my thinking is constantly to look back at what our founders did. Fallible people, men with desires and needs and wants and people that made mistakes, chasing this perfect cause of liberty. Knowledge is where it started. Well, what did they read? Well, I just said some names. Aristotle, Plato, Socrates. They read all of the ancients. Marcus Aurelius. They studied those things. Back in the day, when it was said that a man was learned, when he had an education, didn't mean that he was good at social studies or that he was good at math. It meant that this person probably spoke or understood some Latin, some Greek. They studied the Romantics. They studied the ancients that we just talked about. They studied the history of Europe. They studied the history of Greece and Rome. And that gave them a worldview to understand the patterns and the ebb and flow of society. It gave them an understanding of how man interacts with the world. How can we expect ourselves to continue this republic if we don't understand these things ourselves? You go look through any comment thread and everybody thinks they have the answers. Yet all we keep doing is sounding off louder and louder the same bullshit, the same nonsense. Knowledge is not power unless it is harnessed and applied. Gasoline can be lit on the ground and it can burn up in seconds. It can be pumped through an internal combustion engine where it can be harnessed to propel a machine to do anything from cut grass to drill a well to drive you across the country, right? Money by itself is just inert metal or paper, or now buttons, not buttons, but dots on a computer screen. It can be harnessed into anything from an artificial heart to pump your blood, to music, to something that defies gravity, like an airplane. These things themselves, like money and knowledge, do nothing until man, again, I reiterate for those of you that get pissed, I don't need to say men and women, I'm talking about mankind, till we harness it and do something with it. How bad do we want this republic to endure? How can we demand virtue from our leaders when we don't exhibit it in our own life? How can we demand that those that lead us act a certain way when we, on the other hand, on the hand of who we are, we ourselves can't look in the mirror and exhibit these things? How can we expect it? To me, that's foolish. It's hypocritical. Am I perfect? F no. Can I do better? Every day in every way, and I try to. It's easy to get wrapped around the concept of something is owed to me. The great President John F. Kennedy said, ask not what my country can do for me, right? But what I can do for my country. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Wow, a Democrat said that? Whoa. How could a Democrat say something like that? The meaningless, inane, nonsensical party politics needs to go away. Our founders never fancied party politics. To go back and look at our founding and think that in this modern time we can strip ourselves back to the simple times that they had without some change is foolish. But in the same sense, we can't expect to live now under this same self-governed rule of law if we do not hold the ideals of personal virtue in high esteem. So what do we do? What do we do? Knowledge is the pathway to everything. Learning is the gateway to knowledge, right? Learning is the path to get that knowledge. Choice is how it all starts. I need this thing. I want to see what's on top of that mountain, so I'm going to go walk up it. That is what learning and the acquiring of knowledge is. From kindergarten to doctorate programs. It is a choice. Even if you're forced as a child to go to school, if you're really going to learn, you have to want to. Nobody can pound things into your head, and you're never going to be able to really do well with it unless you want it, which is why teachers try to make things fun and enjoyable and engaging, right? Be it for children or adults. We have to go out and seek knowledge. Who were these men? What stirred their guts? Why did they have this quest for liberty? No, it wasn't just to not pay taxes to the crown. No, it wasn't just so that you could go plant tobacco or have slaves or make your own whiskey. It was something deeper. It was deeper than stuff. It was deeper than this concept of me, me, me. It was this quest, this noble quest that went so far beyond the simple, bullshit, stupid, mundane trappings that the average citizen of America and the people across the globe who have captured our wealth for the last 100+ years have gained. It's not just about the stuff. It is this idea that I can live a certain way, and in doing so will leave this place better. That is what the virtue is that they talked about, this concept of crafting this world, this like helix of DNA, this little section that is me, That's what this means. This chain is like DNA. I'm a piece of this chain of DNA that goes on into infinity, forever, for always. That's what they were doing. It's not about, man, I hope in the future people can have the internet and TVs and that they can tear streets up and rob Home Depots of electric drills. They didn't think about these things. That was absurd. They would have put those people in stocks and locked them up in prison. If you went into a store and robbed it, I guarantee in 1780 bad shit would have happened to you. I guarantee in 1880 if you went into stores and pilfered it, somebody would have done something to you, and it might have included a baseball bat or a firearm. The idea and the notion that somehow our country owes us something is the poison. It's the poison that we put in our kids. So if you, I don't care what race you are, what color you are, what creed you have as your own, what nation you hail from or your bloodline hails from, I don't care what city you were born in, I don't care what God you serve, if you live on this soil and you fancy yourself to be an American, then for God's sakes, the universe's sakes, whatever you worship, I give two shits, then I beseech you to do this. Find out what it means, what they meant to be an American. Forget what your parents told you. Forget what your school teachers told you. Forget what the CNN or the Fox or the C-SPAN or any of the frickin' talking heads, including me, most of all me. Forget what anybody has told you and go find out for yourself. I caution you to be careful of who and what you listen to, because there is more lies and more bullshit and more innuendo and more twisted facts than there is truth. Where do you go? Go read the writings of these men and women. Go read the letters that they wrote. Samuel Adams, for example, or Benjamin Franklin. These letters are available for us to read. You can read the correspondence of these people. It was just like me or you writing a letter or an email or a note to each other. You can see what was in their heart. You can see that the product of their life, you can see the product of their life meant something other than fucking stuff. Now you may say, well, that's not true because many of them benefited from the Republic. Of course, nobody suggested that our nation should exist so that everybody should be poverty-stricken and live digging around on the ground like a pig. That's not the purpose. It is to have the ability to go chase whatever life you choose. Go seek that knowledge. Go dig it out. Set aside a month. Today is June 8th, 2023. June 8th, 2023. I'm fast approaching my next birthday. Hyper aware of the passing of time. One of the last times that I was in this area, these leaves were all gone. Now here they are. Time flies. Spend the next month. By the time you see this podcast, it'll be a few days, a week from now. Write on your calendar, every day. So there's 56 founders. Well, let me rephrase that. 56 signers of our Declaration. I mention this often. It stirs my guts. It stirs me in a way that nothing else that I've ever read about or thought about actually has. I visited many of the graves of these people. Over 30 of them to date. There's a couple that we don't know where they're buried. The rest of them I will visit. Pick the list. Just search out Declaration of Independence Signers. Print a list off. And once a day, open up some information about these people and read who they were. You're going to find some things that are astounding. You're going to find some things that are thought-provoking. You're going to find some things that stir you to tears. You're going to find some things that give you a great sense of hope. You're going to find some things that give you a sense of injustice. You're going to find some things that fill you with gratitude, most of all. Because these people did for you, for me. I think if we approach this concept that something is owed to us, we are lost. Stop watching this recording now. I have nothing for you. You have nothing for me. I don't wish to waste my life or my time with people that only wish to argue and want no results. So if you feel you are somehow owed something in this life, that's what you're owed. I just spit. That's what you're owed. You ain't owed shit. You're here. This spark of life happened. God or happenstance, the universe, whichever thing you find to fit your heart, I'm not going to tell you which, put you here. I find it very hard to look about at all of this and think it happened by happenstance. I think it's very far-fetched to think that the beauty and intricacies of this natural world did not have the design and handiwork of something much smarter than I, but that's not what this is about. Go dig in and find out who these people were. Look at the sacrifice that they gave. You're here in this time, in this place, right now. Good, bad, right, wrong, indifferent. You're here. Leave your mark. Leave a mark. Do something for somebody besides yourself. And if that's your life already, if you live a selfless life, thank you, because you are an inspiration to everyone if that is the life you live. If everything you do is for others, then that is wonderful. Then you are living a life of virtue. I do think that there is hope for our republic. It's not in politics. I don't believe that it ever has been. Our government is always and will always exist through the people. Capture that concept and hold on to it. It's not them and us. It is we the people, in order to form a more perfect union. We the people. It is not the government and us. Oh, well, all the elections are rigged. I'm sorry to say this to you. I don't care what secret information you read on the internet. I've been involved in so many elections. No, they're not all rigged. In fact, what's really rigged is people's brains. Get off of all the social media feeds and go run a local campaign. Go help the people running in your community. Go put in the work. That is what that virtuous life is about. Go invest into your community. You don't like the taxes, you don't like the school boards, you don't like the things going on, go run for office or help somebody. If you don't like the bullshit going on, do something. If you are not, you are a waste. And I'm not pointing at you and saying you are a waste, but that is just the facts. Those are the facts, and I abide in them. You can't have one without the other, and you can't suggest one is one way and the other is not. If you are not helping to provide some solutions and all you are doing is pointing fingers, you are a leech on the back of society. Let's embrace this beautiful liberty that was handed to us that is now completely in peril. It is not in peril because of other governments. It is not in peril because of government. It is not in peril because of shadowy people in dark places. It is in peril for one reason and one reason alone. You and me make we. It is in peril because we, the people, have dropped the ball on what it means to have civic virtue. Who's going to fix that? Can we mandate civic virtue? Can we force people to do their part? Can we force people to care about their neighbor, about the people that live across the street, down the block? Can we force people to do those things? The answer is no. Whose responsibility is it to instill that into the next generation of people? Whose responsibility is it to correct the course of our own hearts and minds? Mine and mine alone. Nobody else can do that for me. Nobody can do that for me. And in asking, that is the most pure, in utter apathetic, lazy, trash-ass way to think I've ever heard. A man or a woman that cannot muster some level of self-respect to think about, again, what part I play in this DNA, this fabric of the society that I live, I work in, that I was born in and that one day I will die in. It's a sad thing. The air is sweet today on this hill. Parts of the world, there's forest fires. People think that's all a conspiracy. There are millions and millions and millions of acres that burn every year, and they say 80 to 90% of them are started by humans. I don't believe they're always just started because of nefarious reasons, but people do stupid crap with cigarettes, forest fires, take spark arresters off of equipment, etc. Stop looking for all the evil and figure out what good you can inject into the world. Well, I can't do anything because the powers that be have completely limited and stopped me from doing anything. So you're completely ineffective in life, is what you're saying. Anything that happens to you is somebody else's problem. Any good that you have, did you do anything to bring any good to you? Or is anything that happens to you somebody else's doing? Most people are happy to say, well, the good shit I did, any bad shit somebody else did. You ever heard that? Yeah, all these good things, that award, that cool thing I did that. All this bad crap over here, that's because the world's out to get me. That's because of government interference. That's because of my parents not loving me enough. That's because I got beat when I was a kid. That's because somebody hurt me and I can't get over it. That's because somebody left me and I can't get over it. That's because I was born this time or this way or that way. Shut up. Let it go. What's the goal? My goal is to live a long, full life. Part of being a full life is doing my part to help protect this republic. My part, while small, is still as important as anybody else's. And that is the truth right there. We must own this little section, this little chunk of earth that we live on for the short time that we're here, and till up a good garden. Make it beautiful. Make the things around you in the nature that is your life. Leave something behind so that as somebody looks over the fence, so that as somebody looks into the history books of your life, they say, man, I'm really grateful that Aunt so-and-so or Uncle so-and-so or Grandpa so-and-so or neighbor so-and-so did that. Because in that, I had an example. I was able to see, to feel, to think about the world in maybe a way that I couldn't have otherwise. That is what the founders did. They knew none of this would be perfect. They knew these perils would come time and again. And if for a second you think that we're worse off now than we've been at other times, you're wrong. Our union almost fell apart before it even began. And then again in the 1860s, 1861 to 1865. A pretty horrible time in our history. I will again visit Gettysburg this year and probably Antietam and maybe Shiloh. Whenever I get a chance and I'm in those areas, I visit those Civil War battlefields. Go see those places. Oh, it was about slavery. It wasn't about slavery. It was about liberty. It was about choices. It was about freeing the slaves, but that's not the big picture. The big picture was to give freedom to all, which meant, in this case, the abolition of slavery. Too often, I repeat myself now, get mired down in the things that we were told. You were told a lot of things that were true. You were also told a lot of bold-faced lies. One, because people are ignorant and they just repeat stupid things. Two, because people inject their own opinions that are maybe rooted in good intentions, but bad information. Go find out for yourself. Study this natural world. Study the history of our republic. Study the ancients. Study the Enlightenment period. Study the philosophers. Read about these people. And if you're not a reader, there are so many channels on YouTube where you can listen to 20-minute, 30-minute talks about people like Voltaire that I said, or Marcus Aurelius, or Plato, or Socrates, or any of the great minds of our republic like Jefferson and Adams and Franklin. Go read about them, study about them, absorb the things that were important to them. Think about this. Every day you're absorbing things. Right now you're absorbing something from me. What I'm passing on to you, I absorb from somebody. None of the things I'm thinking about are new thoughts to me. I'm not so ignorant as to think any of this shit is just coming from my genius brain. Who the hell am I? I am just passing on thoughts that came to me from other thinkers. And so too time goes. We are being influenced all the time. You have a choice in what influences you. For those of you that read scripture, I was with some friends this past week, and I love remembering passages from my youth. I also love some things that maybe my parents didn't like Socrates and Plato. But there's a passage that comes to mind right now. Be not overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. How simple a thought is that? Don't be overcome by evil, overcome evil with good. Good is subjective, right? Therein lies the truth. Good to a headhunter is chopping the head off of somebody, right? Good to a thief is breaking into a store. So our concept of good must be attached to morality, to virtue. And the most simple and virtuous thing possible is to care about the people around us, to ensure that they have a good existence. That is noble and the most useful and highest use of our time, of our time spent here. So that in the end, as somebody looks at the link that we made that becomes the DNA chain, this little section of our existence, they'll say, cool, man, I'm glad that guy or girl did what he did. I am glad the founders did what they did. I'm glad that you guys are listening. There is hope. Study the history. Inject it back into the world around you. Go read about what civic virtue is and was. Study up. Put up or shut up. The Republic needs you. This is Mickey with CarryTrainer.com. Drew behind the editing desk. If you guys have questions on any of the stuff we're talking about, throw it in the comments section. If you disagree, toss it out there. I'm happy to disagree. See this face right now? This is go ahead and disagree with me. I'm probably gonna push back and tell you to F off, eh? I'm just kidding. Disagree. Let's have disagreements. It is okay to be in disagreement. It's not okay to be disagreeable. Be kind. If you have questions about any of our training, hit me up at training@CarryTrainer.com. Our S12 event is coming up in November. Z Durham, Paul Sharp, D-Day Response Group, Ben from Boresight Solutions, Supervel Ammunition, CCW Safe, Concealed Carry Inc., Pro Ears, Tactical RX, Colorado Craft Beef, and so many more amazing companies and people passing on knowledge to help make you and your family safer, culminating in live fire TCCC exercises that are probably some of the best in the business. I'm not going to say it just because it's my event. I'm going to say it because it's my event and it's true. Badass time, over 4 days of training, all food, all lodging included. We stay in a facility on about 450-ish private acres outside Nashville, Tennessee. I believe it is the 9th to 12th of November. Check that event out. Be well. Don't be dickheads. Tell somebody you love them. The 4th of July is coming. Let's make a pact with each other, you and I. Let us, from now until the 4th of July, invest ourselves in researching, learning about, molding ourselves into people of civic virtue. Let's do it. Peace out.
Visit our website, CarryTrainer.com, for information about classes held throughout the U.S., CarryTrainer apparel, and upcoming projects. You can also email us at training@CarryTrainer.com for information about setting up your own private course or speaking engagement. Training@CarryTrainer.com or CarryTrainer.com.
I said I got me some gunfighter gun law. Gunfighter gun law, baby. Gunfighter gun law. No more gunfighter blues. Made in the USA. Amazing lubricity. 100% synthetic, baby. So it's gonna last you longer. So go on CarryTrainer.com and order yourself some gunfighter gun or gunfighter lube to get rid of your gunfighter blues. I said go on and order yourself some gunfighter lube. Gunfighter lube. Yeah!